Acadiana. It is Monday, April 12th, 2021, and you're listening to Local News Live, a production of AOC Community Media in partnership with the Acadiana Advocate. Their team of journalists print the stories important to our community and state, and we are happy to read you some of those stories. You can hear Local News Live Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. on AOC 1, the AOC Community Media channel on YouTube, and on Cypress Street Radio at aocinc.org/CS Radio. You can find the print versions of these stories and more at theadvocate.com. We couldn't bring you this community service without the generosity of our volunteer newsreaders. Today, we're joined by Phyllis Grifford. Welcome to Local News Live, Phyllis.
Thanks.
Well, thanks so much for reading. We have some pretty lengthy stories today, so I'm going to get out of the way and go listen on Cypress Street.
In Acadiana, back to life. Little Brooklyn Initiative uplifting historically Black neighborhood with vibrant paint and love by Katie Galliano, staff writer. 71-year-old Daisy August beams when she speaks about her Rozier Street home in New Iberia's Little Brooklyn neighborhood, recently painted a cheerful Caribbean-style blue by the Little Brooklyn Neighborhood Initiative. August was born in the home, and her family are longtime homeowners in this historically Black neighborhood. August's home is one of roughly half a dozen houses the nonprofit community group has revitalized with fresh paint, plantings, and service to enhance the neighborhood's image, home values, and neighbors' pride. The work is recapturing the spirit of the neighborhood, a place of compassion, neighborliness, and generosity, where neighbors would gather when August was younger to host block parties and potluck fundraisers for residents down on their luck, she said. Quote, "It looks like it's been reborn. It looks like a new home. It's like the neighborhood project is bringing everything back to life again. It's like the neighborhood was dormant, dead, and now it's coming back alive," August said. The Little Brooklyn Neighborhood Initiative was the brainchild of Ann Dara and Tammy DiBiase. The two women, both retired, were connected by a mutual friend after they separately had the idea to beautify the neighborhood. Dara is a retired graphic designer, and DiBiase has a background in grant writing, and both wanted to channel those skills into service. Dara has lived around the corner from Little Brooklyn for almost 34 years, and DiBiase is a third-generation resident of Henry Street. In passing the neighborhood each day, the women dreamed of bright colors and an environment that reflected the neighborhood's rich history. Quote, "I knew that people judged people just by driving by, and by seeing houses that were distressed, they might think less of them," Dara said. Quote, "The people are so great back here and nobody knows it. The area, when it was distressed, didn't demonstrate that. It didn't show that. They really deserve to be known for who they are and what they've accomplished and what they've given back," DiBiase said. The neighborhood, which DiBiase said is the oldest historically Black neighborhood in New Iberia, was originally part of the slave quarters for the Duperrier plantation. After the Civil War, the land was subdivided and the streets that comprised Little Brooklyn, including Henry Street, Hortense Street, Johnson Alley, and Rozier Street, became homes for Black families, many of which were passed down through families and created a long history of homeownership. The neighborhood was a hub for jazz music, home to the Guy Fontenot Banner Orchestra and Band, and residents hosted top Black artists on tours during segregation, like Fats Domino, Ike and Tina Turner, Sam Cooke, DiBiase said. The women, both white, were sensitive to the fact that they were outsiders stepping into a historically Black neighborhood to suggest changes, and that those changes had to be from a place of true support, neighborliness, and alliance. It had to come from the heart, Dara said. They started small, first planting trees in the neighborhood, then sewing face masks and distributing them to neighbors while pitching the idea of the neighborhood initiative and getting feedback. What would you like to see? What do you want your neighborhood to be? They also looked to the expertise of the Iberia African American Historical Society and founder Phoebe Hayes, who facilitated relationships, offered guidance, and helped coordinate fiscal elements of the project. Quote, "There's always an element of trust when you come into an African American community. Can we trust that what's being done is not for show or for somebody to take advantage of a neighborhood, but for the good of the neighborhood?" Harold Alexander, 60, said. Alexander, pastor of Church of Christ of Lafayette, is a member of the nonprofit's neighborhood board, which meets monthly to discuss existing work and brainstorm next steps. His wife was born and raised in Little Brooklyn, and the couple bought a home on Rosier Street 25 years ago to raise their children. Alexander was one of the neighborhood leaders the women approached early for buy-in, and he's been building buy-in among members of the community in the months since, he said. The pastor said he's passionate about the initiative's educational opportunities, specifically the chance to teach young people about the process and importance of homeownership and investing in your community. Alexander said he's been guiding young people in the community, especially young men, through the process of first-time homeownership, financing options, and programs available to support first-time homeowners. Alexander said the neighborhood previously suffered from a trend of young people moving away, partly, he believes, because they didn't understand the value of homeownership. That trend resulted in an increase in vacant properties and rental units in the neighborhood. Alexander said he's confident that trend is reversing. The pastor is also pushing education a step further and encouraging neighbors to become involved with the initiative and the health of their community. It's not enough to own a home or live in a neighborhood. You need to be an active contributor to the community's well-being, he said. Gabrielle Johnson, 44, said she's thrilled to get her 5 daughters involved in refreshing their rental home on Johnson Alley. Johnson and the Little Brooklyn Neighborhood Initiative will be transforming her residence from a faded pink to a vibrant peach and freshening up the yard. Johnson said she's excited to be part of positive growth in the neighborhood. Quote, "I think it's super important for the community to step up because I think you appreciate it more when you're part of the change instead of the change just going on around you," she said. Johnson said she moved back to the neighborhood almost 6 years ago. Her grandparents, Jefferson and Helen Johnson, now deceased, lived on Rosier Street and were well known in the community, and other family members are scattered throughout Little Brooklyn's streets. Despite the close ties, Johnson said she and her family were researching buying a house elsewhere because of the neighborhood's drab feel. Quote, "The beautification work has definitely changed my mind and made me want to stick around," she said. The work began last summer with 4 homes on Henry Street, a popular thoroughfare strategically chosen to announce the project and drum up support in the neighborhood and broader community, Dara said. The nonprofit team is now bringing their bright and unifying Caribbean color palette to homes on Little Brooklyn's interior streets and expanding additional projects like the planting of a community garden and citrus orchard on Johnson Alley, Dara and DiBiase said. The work was made possible through grant funding and donations of people's time, talents, and funds. DiBiase said the group received a paint grant from Benjamin Moore, with help from Bayou Paints in New Iberia, and a $2,500 grant from Ladder and Bloom's Great Pumpkin Fund. Local residents have also begun donating materials. DiBiase said she's currently stripping a home on Main Street of salvageable materials after the multi-story historic home was struck by lightning and the owner offered the neighborhood group first dibs on anything usable. Reflecting on the past year, Dara, DiBiase, and Alexander said the neighborhood nonprofit has sparked hope for everyone. Amid a national wave of reckoning around racism and race relations, it's been uplifting to have a meaningful outlet where people of all backgrounds can come together for a common cause, the pastor said. Quote, "It's a good thing to see people of different colors get together. Black and white people get together. Do something positive and uplifting for our community," Alexander said. Quote, "You can get very overwhelmed looking at stuff on the news. When you see a community come together in spite of everything and say, hey, we know there are challenges, but we know we can do this together, that's rewarding," the pastor said. Dara and DiBiase said new project ideas for the neighborhood are constantly brewing, like painted crosswalk walks that celebrate the neighborhood's jazz history. And they said they plan to keep pushing until every inch of the neighborhood shines. While seeing the physical transformation is special, it's the conversations and lifelong friendships the women are building with Little Brooklyn's residents, especially its elders, that make the project worthwhile, they said. Quote, "It's the most fulfilling thing I believe I've ever done in my life," Dara said. Quote, "It's a true connection, a heart-to-heart connection," DiBiase said. Parish council accused of law violations. Suit says library board appointment decided before meeting. By Claire Taylor, staff writer. Two Lafayette Parish residents are suing the Lafayette Parish Council. 4 council members, Lafayette Parish Mayor President Josh Guillory, and Louisiana Consolidated Government, alleging violations of the state's open meetings law. Leslie LeBlanc-Melanson and Dominique Ducote allege in the lawsuit filed Friday in the 15th Judicial District Court that Parish Council members Josh Carlson, John Gilbo, and Brian Tabor violated the open meetings law by conferring and deciding in advance of a public meeting who they would appoint to the Lafayette Parish Library Board of Control. 3 is a majority of the council. The lawsuit alleges that by discussing the vote and deciding in advance who the majority of the council would appoint amounted to a, quote, walking quorum, unquote, of the parish council, which is a violation of the open meetings law. Carlson, Gilbo, and Taylor voted February 9th to appoint Robert Judge to the library board from among 7 people who applied for the volunteer post. Carlson nominated Judge, who in 2018 vocally opposed a controversial drag queen storytime event at the library. Councilman Kevin Nakan is also named in the lawsuit, although he and Councilman A.B. Rubin nominated and voted for others. Rubin was not specifically named in the suit. In text messages obtained by Ducote through a public records request, library board member Landon Boudreau discusses with someone who appears to be Carlson about who the parish council should appoint to the board. The text messages show Carlson saying he, quote, went to bat, unquote, for Judge, and that, quote, Brian and John are on board, unquote. Boudreau, who as a library board member does not appoint fellow board members, wrote, quote, we might need to change our appointment, unquote. He also said he was concerned about Judge's affiliation with, quote, Lunsford and with everything going on, unquote. He was apparently referring to Michael Lunsford, a Breaux Bridge resident who is executive director of Citizens for a New Louisiana, an anti-tax group that opposed a library property tax renewal that voters rejected in 2018. The library board in February was in the midst of an image crisis after the Acadiana Advocate reported the group rejected a Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities grant that would have funded discussions on books about Black voter suppression and history. Board members said they rejected the grant because the 2 moderators were too left-leaning and the librarian, who resigned days later, did not find a moderator to offer an alternative, more conservative voice. The public uproar that followed put the city and library system in the national spotlight. LeBlanc-Melanson and Ducote are asking a judge to void judge's appointment and order a new appointment to the library board. The lawsuit alleges a second open meetings law violation occurred at the February 9th Parish Council meeting when a security guard at City Hall did not allow LeBlanc-Melanson to bring a camera into the council meeting. The security guard advised LeBlanc-Melanson a verbal order had been given that cameras would not be allowed during council meetings, the lawsuit alleges. She was forced to return her camera to her vehicle before being allowed into the meeting room. LeBlanc-Melanson and Ducote are seeking civil penalties and legal fees. Public service announcement. Reach a larger audience. Speak to your local community. Express your uncensored opinion on our #free speech platform. A few of the many reasons to join AOC. Amplify your voice on our channels. Go to aocinc.org/submit. Need access to tools and equipment? Go to aocinc.org/join. You can also tag us when you share your programs on social media, and we'll help amplify your message by sharing on our platforms. At AOC Community Media on Facebook, at AOCINLFT on Twitter, and at AOC Community Media on Instagram. Find it all at aocinc.org. State. Virus aid budget top lawmakers' priorities. 2-month session convenes Monday by Will Sintel and Blake Patterson, staff writers. Louisiana's legislature kicks off its 2-month session at noon Monday, reconvening to craft a budget, tackle tax changes, and divvy up $3.2 billion in federal COVID-19 aid, more than a year after the coronavirus pandemic forced lawmakers into recess. As always, crafting a spending plan for the financial year that begins July 1st is at the top of the agenda for lawmakers. Governor John Bel Edwards opened negotiations in February with a $36.6 billion spending proposal, a rosier than expected outlook thanks to massive amounts of relief from 3 rounds of federal aid to help cope with losses sparked by the pandemic. He's hoping to boost the pay of school teachers. In the so-called, quote, fiscal sessions, which occur in odd number years, lawmakers can file only 5 bills unrelated to finances. More than 900 bills and resolutions had been filed Sunday. They include a number of hot topics. Louisiana has joined a growing list of state assemblies considering limits on transgender rights, including one bill that would put restrictions on transgender athletes competing in girls' or women's sports, and to limit voting accessibility in the name of security. Measures to curb police tactics and restrict the governor's powers during an emergency also will be up for debate. The ongoing scandal over LSU's leadership's cover-up of co-ed complaints of sexual misconduct has prompted a half dozen bills that could significantly change the flagship university's administration and oversight. Quote, tax reform will be one of the dominant issues, said Republican Barry Ivey, Republican Central, a veteran of multiple tax-related debates. State Republican Mike Johnson, Republican of Pineville, made the same point. Quote, that is the most talked about issue and the one I expect we will be spending the most time on, he said. Turning to ideas and bills that have tried and failed over the years, House Speaker Clay Schexnayder, Republican of Gonzales, and Senate President Paige Cortez, Republican of Lafayette, along with other GOP leaders, are backing another effort to remove the brakes that lower or eliminate taxes owed by special interests in hopes of raising enough money to reduce the overall income tax rates. One of the possibilities is eliminating the state income tax deduction on federal taxes paid. Quote, Louisiana has a per capita state and local tax burden that is very competitive. But because of the complexity of the current tax structure, we are ranked near the bottom by many tax policy organizations, Cortez, Schexnayder, and 6 other Republican legislative leaders said in a joint statement outlining the effort. Quote, businesses pay attention to these rankings. Edwards said he'd support a tax overhaul if the package remains, quote, revenue neutral, in which the state treasury doesn't lose the current level of revenue. Quote, what I am not going to do as governor is create that structural deficit that I inherited again. We have worked too hard and made too much progress, and I'm not going backwards on that, he said. Schexnayder also filed a bill aimed at setting up a centralized system to collect and distribute sales taxes to state and local jurisdictions, long sought by businesses, long opposed by local taxing authorities. One of the key topics is whether any tax changes result in a net reduction for taxpayers, which some House Republicans favor, especially amid the windfall of federal aid. Edwards has said the sum of the changes needs to be revenue neutral, especially because Louisiana's 4.45 cents per dollar sales tax hike, sparked by an earlier fiscal crisis, is set to expire in 2025 and trim tax collections by about $500 million per year. The $3.2 billion in federal stimulus aid, state officials have wide latitude on how to use it, could set off weeks of political arguments, and some of the money may be put aside until next year. Quote, how do we not blow this, said House Speaker Pro Tem Tanner McGee, Republican of Houma. Quote, there is a lot of pressure with not screwing this up. The governor said his top priority for the money is replenishing the unemployment trust fund, which has been decimated because of skyrocketing unemployment caused by the pandemic. Other possibilities are roads and bridges, aid for Louisiana's hard-hit tourism industry, and high-speed internet improvements, especially in rural areas. Instead of opening the session with a speech to a joint session of the legislature, as is tradition, Edwards will close Monday with a, quote, State of the State address at 6 p.m. at Southern University's A.W. Mumford Stadium. Doing so will allow state leaders to avoid a jammed scene in the State House of Representatives chamber amid the state's ongoing battle to reduce COVID-19 cases. But officials are relaxing many of the pandemic rules that dominated sessions in 2020 and kept most everyone, except legislators and staff, out of the state capitol. Many, but not all 144 of the House and Senate members have been vaccinated. Quote, I would not be going to the Capitol or committee hearings otherwise, said Representative Joe Marino, a Gretna lawmaker who has no political affiliation. The public will be allowed in this time, entering through the 2 breezeway doors located on the east and west sides of the building under the front steps. Temperatures will be taken at both doors. Those with a fever of 100.4 degrees or above will be denied entrance. Masks will continue to be required until the governor's statewide mandate is lifted. Groups will be limited to 30 people. The observation deck of the state capitol remains closed. Seating in House and Senate committee rooms in both chambers will be spaced to promote social distancing, with overflow rooms available. Edwards has framed his budget priorities around providing the investments necessary to bolster the state's education infrastructure, including $40 million to increase school teacher pay by $400 a year and $200 annually for school support staff, as well as $80 million for pay raises for university faculty. The teacher pay raise plan has gotten a chilly reaction from educators, especially knowing that average pay is about $4,000 below the Southern Regional average. The governor has said he plans to increase his teacher pay raise proposal and add dollars for early childhood education if, as expected, the Revenue Estimating Conference next month boosts its forecast for how much lawmakers will have to spend. Another key topic is exactly what sports betting will look like after nearly 2 out of 3 voters statewide approved its legalization in 2020. The debate will center on whether bettors can place wagers on smartphones, laptops, and other devices, or limit the betting to inside casinos, like Mississippi. Senate President Cortez, who will sponsor one of the bills that spells out the rules, said the consensus view is that permitting betting from smartphones and computers is the only way to generate meaningful revenue, perhaps $10 million per year or more. Critics say doing so would prey on those with gambling problems. Amid an ever-widening probe into sexual misconduct allegations at LSU, Edwards has also thrown his weight behind House Bill 409 from Representative Amy Freeman, Democrat of New Orleans, which would add teeth to the requirements that employees of colleges and universities report misconduct and abuse allegations, creating a chain of accountability all the way to the board that oversees the school. Another bill proposes amending the state's constitution to close the so-called, quote, slavery exception clause, unquote, and make involuntary servitude illegal in all cases. Louisiana's constitution currently bans the practice, except when used as punishment for those convicted of a crime. Other bills on the education front would make corporal punishment illegal, mandate kindergarten, and make it harder to suspend students amid racial disparities in who gets tossed out of public schools. Melinda DeLatte of the Associated Press and Mark Ballard of the Capitol News Bureau contributed to this report. Today in History by the Associated Press. Today is Monday, April 12th, the 102nd day of 2021. There are 263 days left in the year. Today's highlight in history. On April 12, 1945, President Franklin D. Roosevelt died of a cerebral hemorrhage in Warm Springs, Georgia, at age 63. He was succeeded by Vice President Harry S. Truman. On this date, in 1877, the catcher's mask was first used in a baseball game by James Ting of Harvard in a game against the Lynn Live Oaks. In 1955, the Salk vaccine against polio was declared safe and effective. In 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man to fly in space, orbiting the Earth once before making a safe landing. In 1963, civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested and jailed in Birmingham, Alabama, charged with contempt of court and parading without a permit. During his time behind bars, King wrote his, quote, letter from Birmingham jail. In 1981, the Space Shuttle Columbia blasted off from Cape Canaveral on its first test flight. In 1990, in its first meeting, East Germany's first democratically elected parliament acknowledged responsibility for the Nazi Holocaust and asked the forgiveness of Jews and others who had suffered. In 2009, American cargo ship captain Richard Phillips was rescued from Somali pirates by U.S. Navy snipers who shot and killed 3 of the hostage takers. 10 years ago, Japan ranked its nuclear crisis at the highest possible severity on an international scale, the same level as the 1986 Chernobyl disaster, even as it insisted radiation leaks were declining at its tsunami-crippled nuclear plant. 5 years ago, Navy Secretary Ray Mabus told 1,500 Marines and sailors at Camp Pendleton, California, that the Pentagon's decision to let women compete for all military combat positions was as irreversible as earlier edicts to integrate blacks and allow gays and lesbians to openly serve. 1 year ago, Christians around the world celebrated Easter Sunday, isolated in their homes by the coronavirus. St. Peter's Square was barricaded to keep out crowds. Pope Francis celebrated Easter Mass inside the largely vacant basilica, calling for global solidarity in the face of the pandemic and urging political leaders to give hope and opportunity to people who had lost jobs. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was discharged from a London hospital after treatment for the coronavirus. Today's birthdays. Jazz musician Herbie Hancock is 81. Rock singer John Kay of Steppenwolf is 77. Actor Ed O'Neill is 75. Talk show host David Letterman is 74. R&B singer J.D. Nicholas of the Commodores is 69. And actor Andy Garcia is 65. Country singer Vince Gill is 64. Actor Suzanne Douglas is 64. Rock musician Will Sargent of Echo and the Bunnymen is 63. Rock singer Art Alexakis of Everclear is 59. Folk pop singer Amy Ray of the Indigo Girls is 57. Actor Alicia Coppola is 53. Actor Retta is 51. Actor Nicholas Brendan is 50. Actor Shannon Doherty is 50. Actor Marley Shelton is 47. Actor Sarah Jane Morris is 44. Actor Jordana Spiro is 44. Rock musician Guy Berryman of Coldplay is 43. Actor Claire Danes is 42. Actor Jennifer Morrison is 42. Actor Matt McGarry is 35. Zodiac. Aries, March 21st to April 19th. Say what's on your mind and finish what you start. You can accomplish all you set out to do as long as you are direct and proactive when it comes to dealing with obstacles. Taurus, April 20th to May 20th. Stop hesitating and start moving. Do your own thing and step into a leadership position. Be direct, reliable, and efficient, and you will excel. Gemini, May 21st to June 20th. Check out your options and investigate what you require to make a change that will boost your reputation, status, or position. Don't sell yourself short or let anyone discourage you from following your heart. Cancer, June 21st to July 22nd. Stick to your principles. Refuse to let anyone get in your way or take advantage of your kindness. Keep your expenses down and be cautious regarding your physical and financial health. Leo, July 23rd to August 22nd. Stop worrying about what others do or think. Embrace the people and the projects that give you the highest returns. Say what's on your mind. Virgo, August 23rd to September 22nd. Take a moment to organize and strategize. You'll feel better if you have a solid plan in place. You may desire change, but a hasty move will lead to mistakes and regret. Libra, September 23rd to October 23rd. Stay focused on what is important to you. Nurture relationships and pay attention to what's going on around you. Put your energy behind what you envision. Scorpio, October 24th to November 22nd. Keep your emotions controlled and concentrate on making changes to improve your life. Don't spend money on items you don't need or waste energy on people who are taking advantage of you. Sagittarius, November 23rd to December 21st. Don't waste time pondering over something or someone. Concentrate on what you can do to make your life better. Gather information, avoid extravagant people, and strive for balance. Capricorn, December 22nd to January 19th. Proceed with caution. Refrain from getting into a spat with a friend, colleague, or relative. Keep your opinions and plans to yourself until you have everything in place. Aquarius, January 20th to February 19th. Consider what you enjoy doing most and head in that direction. An optimistic attitude will encourage others to support your plans. Adapt the way you use your skills to suit trends. Pisces, February 20th to March 20th. You have more options than you realize. Look over your credentials and update your skills, and you'll find a way to make a lucrative change. Don't make excuses for yourself or others. The horoscope, an entertainment feature, is not based on scientific fact. Toxic hotspots linger at Michoud rocket building plant. Chemicals spilled into the soil and water. By Mark Schleifstein, staff writer. In 1966, as NASA's Michoud assembly facility was building rockets to send the first American to the moon, a tank containing 16,000 gallons of a cancer-causing solvent failed. The contents seeped into the dirt and groundwater at the site, and the federal agency has been trying to clean it up ever since. Although the tank failure, reported here for the first time, was the most spectacular leak at the New Orleans East Complex, a review of dozens of state and federal government records on Michoud show the same chemical had been leaking into the soil and groundwater for years from dozens of drain pipes beneath the immense plant's Building 103, which encloses 43 acres, and from nearby chemical storage ponds. The cleanup problems, which have now lingered more than a half century, stem from the 832-acre Michoud Properties place as a key manufacturing site in the U.S. aerospace program. But they also reflect how unsafe manufacturing practices were until Congress in the late 1970s and early 1980s adopted a suite of laws restricting the use and disposal of toxic chemicals. Michoud is one of hundreds of Louisiana industry sites that have decades-old chemical cleanup programs underway under federal and state supervision. NASA estimates it has spent more than $15 million trying to remove the Michoud contamination since 2010, when it took over the unsuccessful effort. But contractors operating Michoud for NASA spent untold millions of dollars between 1982 and 2010 on a variety of other strategies. NASA was unable to estimate those costs. Now, the federal agency proposes spending another $11 million to reduce the contamination to acceptable levels over the next 30 years, said local spokesperson Craig Betsby. That's only a fraction of the $72.5 million it has estimated a complete cleanup would cost, largely because the new estimate assumes that much of the solvent can remain where it is. NASA's explanation, quote, "The contaminants have been found only in areas that pose no risk to on-site personnel, and there's no potential the contaminants will migrate off-site." The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the State Department of Environmental Quality have yet to approve the still incomplete plans. But a recent EPA decision could complicate NASA's plans. In November, the EPA declared that almost all uses of the major contaminant, trichloroethylene, or TCE, pose an unreasonable risk to human health because the solvent is a carcinogen linked to a long list of other health problems. That might require NASA to pursue a more ambitious cleanup at Michoud. Decisions on NASA's plans are likely to be made piecemeal over the next year or so by the Department of Environmental Quality, which implements federal regulations for the site. NASA is proposing separate plans for 4 areas of concern at the site. But officials with the Governmental Accountability Office, the Congressional Auditing Agency, say NASA's $11 million estimate does not include these areas because under federal accounting rules, their cost was not, quote, reasonably estimable over the next 30 years. If removal of the solvent is required, the total cleanup would far exceed $11 million, Office Analyst Allison Bodden said. Despite TCE's toxicity, NASA officials insist that the contamination will remain a non-issue for the public and site workers. Shannon Segovia, spokeswoman for the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, said NASA, quote, routinely conducts various types of monitoring throughout all our buildings and facilities to ensure health and safety of our employees. She said recent monitoring shows the chemical above regulatory limits only in groundwater that is not used for drinking water. But some environmental activists aren't so sure and urge a more complete cleanup as part of a broader effort targeting other industrial facilities in Louisiana. Quote, "There's nothing we can do about the past, but we should clean these sites up to the fullest extent possible," said Ann Rolfus, founding director of the Louisiana Bucket Brigade, which tracks chemical contaminants at a number of Louisiana industrial sites. Quote, "And there's a silver lining. This cleanup can create jobs. Private industry should foot the bill for cleaning up the mess it created." Quote, "In the case of the Michoud facility, it's hard to believe the promises of no off-site impacts," she said. Quote, "Oil and chemical companies have said this for years, and it's not true. I would ask NASA to publicly release the information on which this claim is based and to clean up as much as possible. A significant cleanup would protect our health and employ people," unquote. History of Michoud. The Michoud site's links to aerospace history date from before World War II, when the U.S. Maritime Commission bought the land to build ships. In 1943, Congress transferred the property to famed New Orleans industrialist Andrew Higgins to build Curtiss C-46 plywood cargo planes. That contract was canceled in August 1944 after only 2 planes had been built. But as the U.S. raced to produce an atomic bomb, Higgins Industries was quickly hired to produce parts for the Y-12 uranium separation plant in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. In April 1951, less than a year after the start of the Korean War, the Army Ordnance Corps took over Michoud, and Chrysler Corporation used Building 103 to build engines for tanks until 1953. In 1961, NASA acquired Michoud for manufacture of rockets for the Apollo program. In the 1960s and early 1970s, Chrysler and Boeing built various versions of Saturn launch vehicles in the building. Martin Marietta, later Lockheed Martin, began building space shuttle external tanks there in 1973. By that time, there was a complex matrix of underground drain lines beneath Building 103, connecting it to tanks where thousands of gallons of TCE were stored, and to two concrete-lined ponds where the used chemical was treated. Other underground pipelines were used for drainage, sewerage, and water. Between 1982 and 1986, the EPA completed a preliminary assessment of all hotspots on the Michoud campus and identified 57, quote, solid waste management units, including old fire pits, a canal used for liquid waste storage, the two chemical recycling ponds, and several landfills. Contractors also discovered large quantities of TCE in near-surface soils and in shallow aquifers beneath and near Building 103 and the chemical ponds. They concluded the source was the 1966 tank failure and the underground pipelines. There's no record of the spill itself in the Department of Environmental Quality's Michoud files dating from March 1966. And the first indication that EPA was aware of the spill came in 1982, when the incident was covered in the federal agency's site assessment. Nor were there any local news stories at the time of the spill. At one point, consultants estimated the solvent contaminated almost 5 acres of soil and an equal area of 2 aquifers beneath and near the building. Recent sampling indicates much of that area remains contaminated, even as Building 103 continues to be used for construction of Space Launch System rocket parts and the Orion capsule that is to return humans to the moon in 2024. The chemical was found at levels that experts call, quote, dense, non-aqueous phase liquid, a term scientists use to describe a chemical in its original liquid form rather than diluted with water. That was both good and bad news. The dense liquid was more likely to sink into the soil than rise to the surface, where people might be exposed. But it had sunk into 2 shallow aquifers, one just 3 feet below the surface and the other 16 to 45 feet underground. Before they were contaminated, both of those aquifers contained salty water unfit for drinking. The chemical sank another 10 feet into a 40 to 60 foot layer of clay between the second and third aquifers. That third aquifer is also too salty for human use. A fourth aquifer, the Gonzales, New Orleans aquifer, is another 400 to 700 feet below the surface and does contain drinking quality water. There's no evidence the chemicals have sunk that deep. The Michoud facility has several wells drilled in that aquifer for use when water from the New Orleans Sewerage and Water Board is not available. A number of other nearby wells also use the Gonzales, New Orleans aquifer, including one at the Folgers coffee plant in New Orleans East. Contractors also discovered another geological issue that has stymied cleanup plans. Before it was developed, the Michoud site was a freshwater wetland. The result is that when water is pumped out, the land subsides rapidly. Some cleanup efforts threatened building foundations and were halted. In 1985, NASA's contractors focused on closing old solid waste sites while exploring ways to remove the solvent. By June 1993, the cleanup had been consolidated into 14 remaining areas of concern. In 2000, the Department of Environmental Quality agreed no further action was needed for 8 of them. By 2020, the list had been winnowed to 4 areas, each with its own complicated history. The tank spill, Area B, where the huge TCE spill occurred and was underlain by leaking chemical, sewage, and drain pipes. A recent report for the state by NASA's latest cleanup contractor, KS Ware and Associates, LLC, said stormwater drainage pipes relined in the past to plug leaks were again allowing chemicals to seep in, and the chemicals were leaking elsewhere as well. According to documents filed with the state, repeated efforts between 1982 and today have failed to remove the solvents, including using steam to vaporize them underground, adding substances to stimulate chemical digesting bacteria, and pumping polluted water out of a horizontally drilled well. In December, Ware said the plume of liquid TCE is now divided into smaller patches that cover less of the aquifers. Based on those findings, Ware said, quote, "The best suited remedial alternative," unquote, for Area B was long-term monitoring of groundwater in the tank farm and for chemical gases below the slab and the southern corner of Building 103. 2 chemical ponds. At Area D, 2 concrete-lined ponds held 1.5 million gallons of chemical wastewater until they were replaced in 1985. The Department of Environmental Quality agreed in 1990 that the smaller of the 2 ponds had been properly contained. In 1997, when Lockheed Martin operated the site, it removed almost 35 tons of chemical waste from the area, the contractor reported to the state. In December 2005, the Department of Environmental Quality agreed no further action was required for areas directly under the 2 impoundments. But 2 years later, new sampling found 2 large plumes of liquid TCE and concluded it might have gotten there through underground pipeline leaks. Department of Environmental Quality reports show contractors then tried heating the aquifer to vaporize the chemical. But so much water also disappeared that the ground sank, and the technique was abandoned in 2018. Ware took over the cleanup that year. New sampling found the chemical had spread to a larger area, but there was no indication the contamination was escaping. In a November proposal, Ware recommended that the state and federal environmental regulators require long-term monitoring rather than new cleanup efforts, because monitoring showed the concentration of chemical was decreasing and the size of the plume was either decreasing or stable. The 2 agencies have not yet ruled on that request. Part of Building 103. Area F includes soil and groundwater layers beneath a portion of Building 103, where TCE was used until 1979. Wastes were collected in drains and transported away through underground lines. Today, the area is home to contractors working on spacecraft component engineering, testing, and production. The work area is underlain by a concrete slab that varies in thickness from 9 inches to 23 inches. In 2005, samples there showed high levels of TCE in the lower and upper layers of the shallow aquifer, 20 to 30 feet below the surface, and it was estimated that between 4 and 5 acres of soil and as much as 6 acres of groundwater were contaminated. That report concluded the material came from inside the building. In August, Ware found that at least 1 underground sampling point showed levels of TCE higher than allowed under state standards. Testing of air inside the building detected traces of 7 chemicals also found beneath the building, but at levels it said posed no health risk. In a November report, Ware concluded, quote, "The only viable options," unquote, for Area F are long-term monitoring of groundwater, the soil below the slab, and air inside the building. NASA also would guarantee that contaminant levels would meet industrial use standards if Building 103 were ever abandoned and require planning, and a site-specific permit for any work that would include digging. State and federal regulators have not yet approved that recommendation. Funerals. Funerals today in the Acadiana area. Marshall Munier, Episcopal School of Church of the Ascension, 1030 Johnson Street in Lafayette at 3:30 p.m. Jake Trahan, St. Michael Catholic Church, 2106 Egan Highway in Egan at 11 a.m. Eloise Verrett, St. Joseph Catholic Church, 117 South Main Street in Lauraville at 2 p.m. This has been Local News Live for April 12, 2021. I have been your reader, Phyllis Grifford. Join us at 9 a.m. Monday through Friday on AOC 1 Cypress Street Radio or the AOC Community Media channel on YouTube. You can read these stories and more at theadvocate.com and find out how to volunteer and more at aocinc.org.